In this video, I'm going to cover how to export data out of Castor. So once you're logged in and you have navigated to the list of subject records, for those of you who have the privileges to import and export data from Castor, you'll see these cloud with arrow buttons. The one that shows the arrow pointing down is the export, the download button. You can individually select specific records that you would want to export data from. You could choose all of the records at once, or you can choose from here, export all records rather than just the selected records. Once you've made your choice at which participants to export data from, you can choose what file format to export it as, a comma-separated value file, an Excel file, or an SPSS file. Once you've made your choice, you then have some options that you need to pick from. The first one controls whether or not the values that are displayed are numbers or names. For example, if one of the questions had two choices, yes and no, that yes and no were also recorded within the computer system as a 1 for yes and a 0 for no. You can choose to either export the data as those 0 and 1 or other numbers depending on the question, or as their names, yes and no. In most instances, it's probably easier to choose it as names so that you are explicitly knowing exactly what the participant selected. But for instance, if you were only exporting data for a particular question and you already knew exactly what the responses for that question were and you wanted to do some math on that question, perhaps exporting it as a number would be faster, since if you exported it as a name, you might have to turn it into a number manually, so this just saves you a step. You can then choose how to export if you want this interactive tree that allows you to choose what exactly you're exporting. Bulk variables, which allows you to paste in a list of names of variables that you want to export. This would be used if you knew specific variables such as informed consent date that you knew you wanted to export, and you could list them here to get just those variables. This is faster potentially than the interactive tree since you don't have to search through a big long list, but only if you already know exactly what names you are of the variables you're looking for. If you choose variable list, theoretically you should be able to choose from a list of all the variable names. Unfortunately, there are thousands of variable names within Castor since we have 17 visits, each with multiple questionnaires, each with dozens of questions, so that variable list actually takes a very long time to load and I would not advise it. I'm going to show this interactive tree because for the most part this might be the easiest. You can choose whether or not you want to export any comments that were attached to specific questions, whether or not you want to export any queries that were attached to specific questions, which, if you remember, queries are similar to comments, except they are not just a message about that it is attached to a particular question. They also prevent that question as being marked as completed. So they're often used as reminders to say, this questionnaire is not completed until, for instance, the PI e-signs it. Once you've made your decisions on these options, you then choose what exactly you want to export. Whether or not you want to export the entire study by choosing and highlighting entire study and hitting export, all of the study forms, all of the reports, or all of the surveys. You can also go into individual areas and choose specific reports that you want to export, specific surveys that you want to export, or specific study forms that you want to export. If you remember from before, study forms are forms that are attached to specific visits and we only collect one time. Reports and surveys might be attached to specific visits. They may not be attached to specific visits. Regardless, we collect them multiple times, either the researcher filling them out or for surveys, the participant filling them out. For study forms, you can choose to export either an entire visit or go into that visit and choose just specific questionnaires from that visit. One thing to note, though, is that all of the questionnaires that have just a button, for instance, the Add AE form, which is just a button to open up an AE, an adverse event report. If I tried to export this, it wouldn't quite work. Since this form is just a button, just a link to the adverse event report, it wouldn't actually export anything. If I want to export the adverse events, I need to go into the reports, find that adverse event report, and export the adverse events. This is a slight limitation in the way that I designed our Castor visits. It allowed me to cut down on needlessly repeating the same questionnaires again and again, instead linking them all to the same report. But when it comes time to export them, it makes it a little bit more time and effort to get what you want. For instance, if you wanted to export just an adverse event that was filled out during visit 10, you'd have to export all of the adverse events from inside the reports and then browse through and find the one that was completed in visit 10. A little bit of a downside, but in the end, cut down on a lot of bloat within Castor. Once you've made your choice of what you want to export, and I'm going to choose something that has actual data in it, so I will choose this ham A. You then hit the export button, and it should start packaging up that data and has now saved it onto my computer as a zip file. That zip file will be filled with multiple comma-separated value files, some of them containing the comments, some of them containing the queries, some of them containing all of the radio button options, just in case you forgot what the possible options for a question were. It's all recorded in there. The meat of it, though, should be within a file called pet export with the date, 2021-17 in this case, that contains a row for every participant with columns for all of their answers. In this case, all of the participants did not have any questions filled out because they were all test participants, hence why it looks kind of blank. But that is how you export data from Castor and an example of what it will look like once you export it out. Thanks for listening, that's it.